You're tired, but not the kind of tired that sleep can fix. Not the kind that a weekend off will solve. It's deeper. A kind of exhaustion that stays with you even when you're resting. This isn't just physical or mental fatigue. It's spiritual drain. And Schopenhauer knew exactly why we feel this way. He saw it as a part of life itself. This video will show you why you're not just tired and how to break free. You've slept. You've rested. You've taken a break, logged off, gone on walks, tried meditation apps, switched jobs, distanced yourself from people, and still, you wake up tired. But it's not your body that's asking for rest. It's something deeper, something darker, a kind of fatigue that doesn't begin in your muscles but in your soul. This isn't the exhaustion of overworking or lack of sleep. This is a quiet, soul-deep despair, a sense that nothing, not pleasure, not peace, not even purpose, can fully awaken you anymore. And if that's what you're feeling, you're not alone. Schopenhauer called it the burden of existence, this relentless cycle of striving, desiring, achieving, and then collapsing into emptiness. You don't just want rest, you want release, you want to stop pretending. You want that another goal, another weekend, another relationship will fix what's broken inside you. Because the truth is, what you're really experiencing isn't just burnout. It's spiritual depletion. It's the hollow echo of a life running on survival, not meaning. It's the silence that follows when the noise of distraction fades and you're left alone with a question you've tried to avoid. Why does this life feel so heavy? Society will tell you it's because you're not doing enough or not doing it right. But Schopenhauer saw the truth long before modern psychology caught up, that human beings are driven by endless desire, and that desire itself is suffering. You're tired because you've been chasing shadows, more success, more validation, more dopamine, but each time you reach the summit, the view disappoints. You thought you were climbing toward peace, but you were circling the same mountain of dissatisfaction. And now you're not just physically drained, you're existentially wounded. Your soul is whispering that it can't go on like this. It doesn't want another trick, another promise of happiness if you just do one more thing. It wants silence, simplicity, stillness. You're not lazy, you're not broken. You're just carrying the weight of being awake in a world that has forgotten what the soul needs. And maybe that's where healing begins, not with more effort, but with less, with surrender, with the courage to stop and finally listen to the ache beneath your tiredness. The ache that says, I want something real. You think you want success. You think you want love. You think you want peace. But beneath each of those wants is a deeper hunger, one you rarely name because it scares you. It's not the desire to gain. It's the desire to feel whole, to come home to yourself, to stop chasing and start being. Schopenhauer wrote that human life is defined by an endless cycle of willing. We want, we strive, we suffer. And when we get what we want, we feel a momentary relief, only to discover a new desire has already taken its place. This cycle never ends, and you're starting to notice it. That's why you feel so empty even after achieving things that were supposed to make you happy. The job, the relationship, the body, the house, each milestone is followed not by fulfillment, but by another void. Because it was never about the thing. It was about the feeling you hoped the thing would give you. But the feeling doesn't last, does it? That's the trick, that's the trap. You're not just tired of striving. You're tired of being manipulated by your own mind. Schopenhauer compared desire to a pendulum swinging between pain and boredom. When you lack what you want, you suffer. When you get what you want, you become restless. And in that restless space, your spirit starts to crack. You begin to suspect that life, as you've been living it, is built on illusions. Every craving is a promise. Every promise is a lie. And deep down, what you truly hunger for is meaning. Not distraction, not dopamine, not temporary highs. Meaning. But meaning can't be bought or consumed. It has to be uncovered. It lives in presence, not in progress. And this realization, This collapse of the illusion is painful because it marks the death of who you thought you were. You're waking up, and it hurts because the world around you is still sleeping, still running on the fuel of more. But you're starting to hear something else now, a quieter voice beneath the noise. It's asking not what you want, but what you are, not what you can achieve, but what you can accept. This is the first step out of the spiral, the first break in the loop. You don't need more to be whole, you need to return to what's real, and that begins when you finally admit the hunger was never for things, it was for truth. You wake up and you feel behind. Before your feet even touch the floor, there's already a pressure inside your chest, a silent demand that whispers, do more. Productivity has become the modern gospel. Rest is seen as laziness. Slowness is failure. You are expected to be a machine, endlessly grinding, endlessly optimizing. And for a while you bought into it. You filled your days with tasks, your nights with planning, your free time with guilt. You told yourself that if you just worked hard enough, if you just got everything done, then maybe you'd finally feel okay. But you don't. You never do. Because the to-do list is infinite. The expectations never stop growing. You've become a prisoner of invisible metrics, judged not by your spirit, but by your output. Schopenhauer saw this trap long before the age of smartphones and schedules. He believed that existence is suffering because our inner drive is never satisfied. And in the modern world, that suffering is masked behind the smile of productivity. You're not just doing things anymore. You've become addicted to the feeling of being busy. Why? Because if you slow down, the silence might start speaking. It might ask you questions you've been avoiding. Like, who are you when you're not achieving? What do you value when no one is watching? Are you chasing a life that even feels like yours? Spiritual exhaustion comes not only from doing too much, it comes from doing too much that doesn't matter. It comes from living by standards you never agreed to, running toward goals that were handed to you by a world that never stopped to ask what your soul needs. You feel drained not because you're weak, but because you've been strong for too long in the wrong direction. There's a difference between a full schedule and a full life, and somewhere along the way you lost that difference, but here's the truth. You don't have to earn your worth through effort. You don't have to prove your value by staying busy. You are allowed to rest, to breathe, to exist without justification. The most radical act in a world obsessed with doing is to simply be. Not for applause, not for results, but because your spirit was never meant to be a machine. It was meant to feel, to wonder, to connect. And until you reclaim that, no amount of productivity will ever fill the emptiness inside. There's a moment you dread, even if you can't name it. It's not the noise, not the chaos. It's what comes after. The silence, the stillness. That moment when the world finally quiets down and you're left alone with your thoughts. At first it feels like peace, but then it grows heavy, uncomfortable, like something buried deep is starting to stir. That's because silence is not empty. It's full of everything you've avoided. Schopenhauer believed that much of human suffering comes from our inability to sit with ourselves. In distraction, we escape. In noise, we hide. But when there is no one to impress, no deadlines to chase, no background music to mute the unease, the truth begins to rise. And that truth can be terrifying. The spiritual drain you feel isn't just from overwork, it's from emotional debts you never paid, questions you never answered, grief you never grieved. You've kept moving to outrun them, but in silence they catch up, and it feels like drowning. But here's the paradox. Healing can only happen in that silence. The wound must be felt before it can close, and that is where the spiritual battle begins. Not with action, but with presence. Most people think they're afraid of being alone, but what they're really afraid of is meeting the parts of themselves that have been ignored. The guilt, the shame, the doubt, the dreams they buried, the voices they silenced. And yet, those are the exact parts that hold the key to your freedom. Schopenhauer didn't offer easy comfort. He didn't sugarcoat reality. But he pointed to a truth we desperately need to remember. You cannot numb your way to a meaningful life. Pain is not the enemy. It's the portal. And when you finally stop running and let the silence speak, something unexpected happens. You begin to hear a softer voice beneath the noise, the voice of your inner self. Not the version molded by society or shaped by fear, but the real you. The part that remembers what joy feels like, the part that knows what peace is, the part that doesn't need to perform or pretend. That voice is quiet, but it's always been there, waiting, watching, hoping you'd slow down enough to notice. Because in the end, the silence isn't screaming at you, it's calling you home. We are surrounded by everything and yet starving for something. More screens, more food, more convenience, more content. And still there's a gnawing emptiness that refuses to be satisfied. It creeps in during quiet moments, lingers in crowded rooms, and echoes in laughter that feels too forced. Schopenhauer believed that desire is the root of suffering, not because we want too little, but because we want endlessly. As soon as one craving is fulfilled, another takes its place. We chase pleasure thinking it will fill the void, but it only distracts us long enough to forget it's there. And when the distraction ends, the void feels deeper than before. This is the exhaustion that haunts us, the spiritual depletion that comes from feeding everything except the soul. We nourish the body, we entertain the mind, but we neglect the one part of us that can't be fed with things. And so the soul grows hungry, not for more, but for meaning. Not for noise, but for truth. Not for achievement, but for authenticity. You can feel it in those quiet aches, when you scroll for hours and feel worse, not better. When you keep achieving, but still feel like a fraud. When you're surrounded by people but feel completely unseen. These are not signs of laziness or weakness. They're spiritual signals, warnings from within that something vital is being ignored. Schopenhauer's dark honesty forced us to ask the hardest question. What if happiness as we define it is the wrong pursuit? What if the soul doesn't want happiness but wholeness? And wholeness requires facing discomfort, embracing limits, and learning how to sit with dissatisfaction without immediately trying to erase it. That's not how the world works, though. The world tells you to cure your sadness with shopping, silence your doubts with dopamine, and numb your fears with fantasy. But the soul doesn't respond to shortcuts. It wants something real, something rooted, something that doesn't vanish the moment the screen turns off. And in that desire, there is hope, because the soul's hunger is not a flaw. It's a compass. It's pointing you back to what matters, not the next high, but the deeper truth. Not temporary pleasure, but enduring peace. You're not failing because you're tired. You're tired because you've been feeding every part of yourself except the one that needs it most. You've been told you're making progress, climbing ladders, reaching milestones, getting things done. And yet, something inside you feels like it's slipping further away. That's because not all progress is spiritual progress. Not all movement is forward. Schopenhauer warned us, the external world will always celebrate your productivity, but it will never ask if your soul is dying in the process. You could be winning at life and losing yourself at the same time. And deep down you know this. That inner unease, that persistent emptiness, it's the soul's rebellion. It's the part of you that refuses to be buried under schedules, screens, and social expectations. We've confused motion for meaning. We assume that the busier we are, the more alive we must be. But spiritual fatigue doesn't come from doing too little. It comes from doing too much of the wrong things. We silence the soul by calling it laziness when it's really exhaustion from pretending. We label our discomfort as depression when it's really the quiet grief of a life that doesn't align with who we are. Schopenhauer said that most people would rather suffer in distraction than face the rawness of reality. But the soul doesn't forget. It remembers who you were before the roles, before the routine, before you became a reflection of what the world wanted from you. That memory creates friction, the feeling that something essential is missing, and the more you ignore it, the louder it gets. That's why you feel drained even after sleep, why achievements taste hollow, why nothing seems to stick. The soul is rejecting the illusion. It's pulling you back from artificial light towards something more ancient and real. Maybe you haven't lost your motivation. Maybe your soul just refuses to run toward a future it never asked for. Maybe this fatigue is sacred, a form of protection, a pause disguised as failure, a whisper from within, telling you to stop chasing and start listening. Because true progress isn't about becoming more, it's about becoming honest, about facing your fear of stillness and learning that silence doesn't mean emptiness, it means space. And in that space, the soul can finally breathe, it can finally speak. And if you're brave enough to listen, it will guide you. Not toward what's expected, but toward what's true. Most people live entirely outside themselves. They chase experiences, possessions, and recognition, believing that the next thing will finally complete them. But Schopenhauer saw through that illusion. He believed the external world was a pale shadow compared to the richness of inner life. The tragedy? We've stopped visiting our inner world. We don't trust it anymore. It's too quiet, too raw, too slow. We fill every empty space with noise, scrolling, swiping, streaming, terrified of what we might find if we're alone with our own thoughts. But here's the truth no one wants to admit. Your spiritual exhaustion doesn't come from the weight of the world. It comes from abandoning your own. You have a landscape within you, full of memories, symbols, truths, and ancient intuitions, but you've forgotten how to walk through it. The modern world teaches you to curate your outer identity, but never asks you to explore your inner essence. And so, you become a stranger to yourself. You know your schedule better than your values. You know your followers better than your fears. But your soul doesn't live on your phone. It lives in those sacred spaces you keep avoiding, in the questions you never ask, the dreams you dismiss, the sadness you suppress. Schopenhauer taught that suffering sharpens awareness. When everything collapses, when the masks fall off, when the noise fades, that's when you remember. There's a whole universe inside you waiting to be felt. This is why burnout often leads to awakening. It forces a retreat into the self, back to the realm where meaning actually lives. Spiritual energy doesn't come from doing more. It comes from being aligned, from living in harmony with what your inner world knows to be real. But this takes courage, because your inner world doesn't lie. It won't flatter your ego. It will show you your shadows, your regrets, your deepest longing. And that truth is heavy, but it's also healing. You weren't meant to live at the surface. You were meant to descend into thought, into reflection, into being. Your spiritual fatigue is a signal. Not that you've failed, but that you've forgotten. The answers are still there. They've just been waiting, quietly, patiently, for you to return to the place you left behind, yourself. When you've been spiritually drained, it feels like there's nothing left. You can push through the day, but the vibrancy, the passion, the drive, you feel it slipping through your fingers. It's as if you're operating on autopilot, your energy consumed by the endless tasks and the external demands, leaving no room for what truly matters. Schopenhauer would tell you that this is not a coincidence. He believed that the life force that drives you, your will to live, becomes distorted in modern society, leading you to drain yourself in pursuit of fleeting, shallow goals. What was meant to be a force of life and creativity now works against you, feeding your stress, your anxiety, and your burnout. This will is not just an abstract concept. It's the spiritual energy that fuels your existence, and when it's misdirected, it can leave you feeling hollow. So, how do you reclaim this vital energy? The answer, Schopenhauer suggests, is simple. Stop giving it away to everything and everyone. Focus on the things that truly nurture your spirit, not those that demand constant validation or that have no real meaning. Start by identifying what truly fuels you, not the distractions, not the external rewards, but the quiet, lasting joys that reconnect you with your deeper self. This means saying no to many things. It means letting go of societal pressures that tell you success is measured by your productivity, your possessions, or your outward achievements. Real success, according to Schopenhauer, lies in spiritual contentment and inner peace. Reclaiming your energy also means setting boundaries. Learning to protect your mental space is not selfish. It's necessary for your survival. You must stop allowing your energy to be siphoned away by the demands of others, by toxic relationships, by work that doesn't align with your values, and by distractions that numb your soul. The truth is that your spiritual energy is finite. When you allow it to be drained constantly, you have little left to give to what truly matters: your growth, your relationships, your dreams. Schopenhauer was adamant about the need to find balance. You must engage with the world, but you must also withdraw into silence, into nature, into solitude. This is where you recharge. This is where you remember what it means to truly live, rather than merely survive. As we go through life, it's easy to become overwhelmed by the noise, the constant demands, the distractions, the endless pursuit of things that ultimately don't matter. Schopenhauer understood this struggle deeply. He saw modern society as a force that pulls people away from their true selves, encouraging them to chase external validation rather than inner peace. The more we chase external rewards, money, status, recognition, the more spiritually drained we become. In a world that constantly pressures us to be more, do more, have more, we lose touch with what really brings us fulfillment. Schopenhauer believed that this endless pursuit of external goals was not only exhausting, but inherently unsatisfying. The moment we achieve one goal, we set our sights on the next, and the cycle continues. It's a never-ending treadmill, and at some point, we must ask ourselves, what's the point? Why are we working so hard to achieve things that ultimately don't bring lasting happiness or meaning? The search for meaning is something deeply personal, and it requires us to reflect on what truly matters to us. Schopenhauer suggested that finding meaning in life comes not from external success, but from internal peace. This can only be achieved by reconnecting with your inner self and distancing yourself from the forces that drain you. This is not an easy task. It requires introspection, self-awareness, and the courage to question societal norms that define success in terms of material wealth and achievement. What Schopenhauer knew is that when we stop living for others and start living for ourselves, we begin to understand the true nature of life. The search for meaning is, at its core, about alignment. It's about understanding that your purpose is not something you can find outside yourself. It is something you must uncover within. When you stop giving your energy to superficial pursuits and redirect it toward what nourishes your soul, you begin to experience life on a deeper, more fulfilling level. Schopenhauer would argue that the answer to the chaos of modern life is simple. Let go of the endless pursuit of external validation. Seek instead the peace that comes from within. Only then will you truly feel the spiritual replenishment you've been craving. In the final chapter of this journey, we confront the ultimate question: how do we escape the cycle of spiritual exhaustion and find true fulfillment? Schopenhauer's philosophy offers a profound insight. Through the embrace of inner peace and detachment from the worldly noise, we live in a world that constantly pulls us in different directions, demanding our attention, our energy, our time. Society tells us that success is defined by how much we accomplish, how much we own, and how many people admire us. Yet despite our efforts, many of us feel a sense of emptiness, a longing that no achievement can satisfy. Schopenhauer suggests that this emptiness arises because we are living in opposition to our true selves. We are caught in a battle between our inner desires, which yearn for peace and stillness, and the external pressures, which demand that we be constantly active and striving. To break free from this cycle, we must turn inward. It's about cultivating a practice of self-awareness, of pausing and reflecting on what truly matters. The act of introspection, of questioning everything that society has conditioned us to believe, is the first step toward spiritual replenishment. When we stop chasing the approval of others and start listening to our own hearts, we begin to reconnect with our essence. Schopenhauer would say that true happiness comes not from acquiring more, but from shedding the excess, the distractions that prevent us from experiencing life as it is meant to be experienced. It is in the moments of stillness, the quiet spaces between thoughts, that we can reconnect with our deeper selves. True contentment arises from aligning with this inner wisdom. This is not to say that we abandon the world entirely or disengage from our responsibilities. Instead, we must approach life with a different perspective, one that prioritizes inner peace over external achievements. The pursuit of spiritual replenishment is not a one-time event, but a continuous journey. As you begin to live more authentically, you will notice a shift. The chaos of life will no longer feel as overwhelming. Your energy will no longer be constantly drained by societal expectations. Instead, you will feel a sense of calm, a sense of purpose, and a deeper connection to yourself. Schopenhauer's wisdom teaches us that the key to spiritual fulfillment lies within us. The world may continue to pull us in all directions, but when we reconnect with our true selves, we can remain grounded and replenished. This is the path to spiritual replenishment, and it is one that we must walk every day with intention, with awareness, and with a commitment to live authentically. Only then will we truly overcome the spiritual drain that plagues so many of us in the modern world.